outrageous content online will get a 17% boost to virality for every moral and emotional word that you use. We're such hypersocial animals, right? And we want to know what other people think about everything, right? We wouldn't say this, but we're so obsessed with opinions of others. And this is the result of a very natural human trait as social creatures, gossip. Our job is not to check your biases. And our job is not to kind of challenge your political opinions. Our job is to ride those opinions as far as we can take them, because that is where the ad money is. If enough people are paying attention to something, we feel obligated to also pay attention to it.
Tobias Rose-Stockwell, you better darn well have something important to say if you're going to be bringing three names to the conversation.
Totally fair.
Yeah. It's like those actors who you're like, ooh, Sean William Scott. And you're like, wait a minute. No one called you that until you
Right.
got an agent. And they're like, your name's a little bit normal. We want to make it long, like Sarah Gellar. No, Sarah Michelle Gellar. Oh, that sounds very serious and important. But all right, I'd love to start with the human superpower analogy, because I've never heard anything explained like this. And it's so, did you make this up, by the way? Because I thought that was brilliant. Yeah. Do it.
Yeah. So the analogy I begin the book with is this analogy of superpowers. Imagine one day the entirety of the planet is blanketed by cosmic radiation, and everyone gets the same new superpower. They wake up in the morning and they can snap their fingers and become invisible. It is a novelty, a delight for some people. Introverts love it. And that morning, everyone feels great about it. But by the evening, the entire world is in chaos. A small number of bad actors start to use this superpower to loot malls, loot banks, and in general begin to cause havoc where they can, because this new superpower has been given to them. So society begins to adapt, but there's this very dark and chaotic period in which a huge portion of the world is just in terror of what they can and cannot see, right? You could have someone creeping on you in your bedroom. Someone might be stealing something from you without you knowing it. There's this huge kind of governmental and social effort to try to suddenly take care of all of these horrible actors that are wreaking havoc on the system at large. So you start to see kind of heat infrared cameras embedded in cell phones. There's laws that are passed to keep people from using invisibility in certain places. Certain religions ban it as outright, but other portions of society actually start to kind of like glom onto this thing and use it, right? So some people have whole relationships with each other because they want their personality to be on display and not the distraction of their physical bodies. So I play out this analogy just to kind of show that there is this strange kind of thing that happens when we are given new superpowers. They cause tremendous havoc upon us, upon society writ large, until society adapts to them. So in the book, in the first chapter of the book, I go through this kind of analogy of us exploring these different superpowers, and it takes a number of years for society to actually kind of emerge from this period of chaos after they are given superpowers. And this is basically an analogy for what happens when we are given new technology, right? We all get a new superpower. When we got smartphones, we got an entire new upgrade to the way we communicate, which is akin to telepathy, right? Which I also explore as a kind of a teaser in the book. Which is, we all are given the ability to spray our thoughts anywhere in the world, and instantly share what we're thinking with everyone on Earth. If we say something the right way, it will expand outward and be this cacophonous, instant point of attention that everyone will pay attention to. But it also causes tremendous chaos in the process, right? Like all sorts of people start saying things that are false. Huge portions of the planet begin getting confused about what is real, what isn't real. And that is, of course, an analogy for social media and what we have now with these tools. Technology has been giving us these new superpowers year over year, and we want the superpowers, right? We ask for them. But the rate at which we are given these new superpowers, we're basically being blasted with cosmic radiation on a monthly basis now, getting new superpowers that are actually changing kind of the organization and functioning of society writ large. And there's this period in between, right? Once we get the superpower until we figure out how to use it, that you might call it a dark time, right? Or a dark valley in which all of society is in chaos, trying to figure out how to actually manage and adapt to this new power that everyone has. So that is, I think, a really important piece of this strange world that we're in now, is that we're just constantly being updated with new incredible. We're basically all superheroes now, right?
Yeah.
We don't think about it, but we're all superheroes on a regular basis. We're getting more and more powers, and it doesn't feel like we're in capes or anything, but we are basically just upgrading our abilities because of tech, and each year the risks are getting kind of more and more extreme as we're blasted with these new powers.
You give a really good analogy, another one in the book, about the pre-valley, dark valley technology thing. You talk about this paved road in Cambodia. Can you go through that as well? I mean, I hate to just be like, give this other thing, but these are really good. And I think they really help my understanding of what you mean by technology's dark valley.
Totally. Yeah. So when I was much younger, I lived and worked in Cambodia in Southeast Asia. It's a small, very poor country in Southeast Asia, next to Thailand, between Thailand and Vietnam.
People should know about Cambodia. Do you talk to a lot of people who are like, never heard of it? Because you're indicating that maybe people have never heard of Cambodia. Maybe am I overestimating people's geography skills?
Great question. I think that it's a small enough country that a lot of people don't know about it. It is an incredible story about what happened there, which we can maybe touch on a little later. But basically, the country went through a pretty terrible civil war in 1975, and the whole country was in very dire shape up until even the early 2000s, with a lot of guerrilla violence. A very broken place in a lot of ways. Beautiful country, amazing people, incredible culture, but average income for farmers living in the countryside is less than $2 per day. Just a very, very poor country. One of the poorest countries in Southeast Asia, for sure.
Yeah. It's that place is I don't need to tell you, but it's wild. I've talked about this on the show very little, but I went there. I ended up staying in a hotel just to give people for the flavor of how wild this place is. This is in Phnom Penh, probably like, let's say 2002 or something like that, maybe around that. There's a guy with an AK-47 who guards the hotel, and it's like this weirdly fancy hotel, but the first floor is just closed. And you just walk upstairs to your room. There's no front desk like there is, but it's just the lights are off and there's like this little barricade. Like, we don't do anything with this. And the guy's outside drunk with this AK-47. And at night, if you're late enough, he's like, give me some money. And you're like, you have a gun, but also you kind of work you're supposed to be protecting me, but you're kind of trying to rob me right now in this weird, semi-intimidating way. And I met these girls there, because I couldn't turn on my shower, and they showed me how to turn on the shower. They were local girls that were also staying in the hotel, and I ended up hanging out with them. And there was an American guy that one of them was married to, and he was on the run from the Cambodian police. They lived in another town. He had apparently shot at the cops because he was also a classy piece of work. But he was a hitman that was on the run in Cambodia, lives there, and does his kind of crazy job elsewhere in Southeast Asia, like an ex-Marine sort of just bad guy. And we're hanging out, as one does. And the girls, I told them I was hungry, and they went and they got me a paper bag full of roasted tarantulas.
Yep.
And I ate the whole thing.
A great treat. Treat.
They were actually really good. And then after I ate them, I was like, how sick am I going to get from these? Totally fine, by the way.
Totally fine.
Completely fine.
Very, very nutritious. They're very nutritious.
I bet. I'm like, there's probably a crap load of protein in these things.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, bags of crickets and other bugs. Really quite nutritious. And interesting direction of the cuisine that went during the time when you couldn't get a lot of good food. They started frying up insects and turning it into its own kind of protein-rich meal.
That makes sense. I hadn't thought about why they eat that kind of thing. I just figured, it's kind of jungly. There's probably a lot of these. People figured it out. Like, I remember going even really deep. I mean, I came to Cambodia overland through Vietnam, And there was like a guy on a motorbike with a giant cage strapped to the back, packed so tightly with rats that they couldn't move. And there were just like tails squiggling out of the back. And I'm like, why does he have those? And then you'd see these jungle huts on little stilts because they're not on the ground because there's too many things on the ground. And there'd be like this little box next to it. And inside is a massive snake. And I'm like, what is that? Why would they have that? It's not a pet. It's in this tiny cage. And they're like, oh, they probably caught it and they're going to eat it.
Yeah, snake. They also eat snake. Yeah, fresh snake. Like, it's pretty good.
Wow, I'm really in the jungle. Like I am very much
totally
in the jungle.
Totally.
But to your point, going on a tour I brought one of the girls on a tour because she'd never been to anything touristy because they lived in another place and she was very poor. So we went to the killing fields, and that was an experience. I mean, Cambodia, this is a tangent, but I feel like it's interesting. Cambodia's civil war was so gross. They killed, like 3 million or 2 million people?
Yeah, almost 2 million people.
Which is like...
Yeah, it was the largest per capita loss of life, I think, in the last century. Some studies
show. It's like a third of the population, right? Wasn't it?
Huge portion of the population, yeah. And they can't even really properly count it because they just didn't account for it. People would just get killed constantly if they oppose the Khmer Rouge, which is this very, very, very draconian, hyper like a very extreme regime that was in place from 1975 to 1979. And so they participated in what ended up being auto genocide, which is, this doesn't happen very often. Usually genocides happen when it's one cultural group against another cultural group, right? But in Cambodia, it was basically a in-group against in-group because they were constantly there was such a hyper-paranoid regime. It's almost like the most extreme version of cancel culture, that everyone was kind of looking at each other constantly to try to call people out if they weren't orthodox enough and weren't following the kind of line of the party enough. It was this very extreme and intense version of Maoist communism, and so they were constantly looking for spies and people that weren't pure enough, and so they would just take them off, and they would actually train children much of the time to go off and be the executioners because the kids just were indoctrinated so heavily into this, and they'd take them off to the killing fields and just kill them. There's these amazing, horrible but like really incredible monuments around the country to these atrocities that happened during that time. I mean, amazing place.
Yeah. Have you been to Tung Sol, that school? I think it's called Tung Sol, this school where they turned a school into a prison camp. And it's one of the grossest, scariest places. And they do a really good job of kind
of... Slang, I think.
Tol Slang. Tol Slang, sorry. I'm just going off of 20-year-old memory here.
Yeah,
Tol
totally.
Slang. Yeah, and you'll see like they'll just leave all the handcuffs cuffed to the wall where the people were at that point only a few years prior. And there's all these stains on the walls, and they're like, they're just leaving it there for you to see. And then there'll be a sign that's like, baby killing tree. And you're like, that's got to be a mistranslation. It's like, no, this is where they kill babies against a tree. And you're like, why would they kill babies? Oh, because they were kids of intellectuals. Okay, well, who's an intellectual? Anybody that wore glasses. That can't be true. Yeah, literally anybody who needed glasses. What if you're old? Doesn't matter. Collateral damage. There was lots of stuff like that. And I just remember walking through these killing fields, and this is not like at that time, not like a well-groomed monument. It's a pit, and there's clothing stuff coming out of the ground. It was raining when I went, so there's clothing bits
and bones and
bones. And I stepped down because I had something stuck in my shoe, and it was a jawbone with teeth in it.
Man.
Yeah. So that I will never forget that. Ever. Yeah. Obviously.
Totally. Yeah, really, really powerful place to visit. Mostly, I think, because it happened so recently. I think we tend to, we have narratives about how horrible World War II was and other kind of genocides that have happened around the world. We kind of see them through the lens of history, things that maybe our grandparents experienced. But this happened, up through the 80s and 90s. There was still some terrible stuff that was happening there. So that was definitely during my lifetime, and to recognize that and see that, I found to be really, really powerful and kind of a centering experience about the importance of democracy and the importance of good governance and the importance of not falling prey to political extremism. So that was a real thing. So to give
Solid
context of
tangent,
why,
though. Bravo. Usually you can't do that and stay interesting, but I think we did it. I think we managed. Continue.
Yeah. So I'll just give a real brief intro as to why I was in Cambodia in the first place. So when I was very young, also probably similar, I think we're about the same age. So in 2003, I was traveling through Asia, and I was in Cambodia. I was a backpacker at the time, and I met this monk, this Cambodian Buddhist monk, who basically invited me out to his village in the middle of nowhere. We'll definitely circle back around and connect this to technology, because this is an important story for the narrative here. But basically, he brought me out to this pagoda in the middle of the country. I thought it was just going to be a community visit, and when I got there, there was several hundred common council, village elders, several hundred farmers that were there just to see me. I was there with a friend, and they're like, "Thank you for coming." They stood up one by one. They're, "Thank you for coming. We've been waiting for you. We have this project. Thank you for agreeing to help us rebuild our reservoir that broke." And I was like, "I'm sorry, what? No, you have the wrong person." What? Why am I here? So basically, this community had this irrigation system, this very large irrigation system that had been destroyed during the Khmer Rouge, that provided about 6,000 people with a second crop of rice annually, and they were looking for help in rebuilding it. And they thought, since we were the only kind of backpackers and foreigners that had ever come out that far to visit them, that we were, gonna help them and save them. And This was a totally insane and kind of ridiculous request. I wasn't a trust fund kid. I didn't have any engineering background or anything like that. But what I did have was the internet, and so I had I spent some time with these monks. I got more and more interested in their cause. I said, "Look, you have the wrong person, but I'll at least be an advocate on your behalf." And so I wrote an email to friends and family back home, telling them about this irrigation system, this project. These monks ran a local NGO. They're really, really trying hard to help this community, very, very poor community. And so I wrote this email to friends and said, "Look, there's these incredible monks that are working on this really important project. I want to help them. I'm trying to figure it out." And that email went out to, I think, about 50 people at the time. But one of the recipients was it went to a listserv on a site that a friend had built. And that site,
nobody knows what that is anymore, do they? Do people even know what a listserv is? It's basically like an email list. Yeah, I don't even know how to.
It's like a forum.
It's like a forum, but it's using email. Yeah, it's so long since anyone's used one of these.
Totally, because it's been supplanted. Totally, yeah. A listserv that went. So it was a listserv, but it was embedded within this larger platform that a friend had built back in California. And again, this is 2003, 2004. Pre-Facebook, pre-Twitter, pre-Friendster, and this platform was a prototype social media platform. One of these friends that built this platform, she went on to be one of the first engineers at Twitter. But anyway, this email, which normally would have gone to 50 people, and that would have been it was connected to this listserv, which had friends of friends connected by profile pictures. It looks exactly like a social media platform. It was a prototype social media platform. And that email ended up going viral within this kind of early social media platform. And it ended up being forwarded to friends of friends of friends of friends. And I ended up with this cascade of interest and support. It went viral in this wild way online. Because it was on this early social media platform. And all of a sudden, I'm like, I can't do this project, but all of a sudden I had this support of strangers, random people being like, "I want to support this project. How can I help? What can I do to support it?" And this virality suddenly gave me the superpower to help these monks, right? There was all of a sudden like engineers that were reaching out to me. There was people that wanted to fund it. And it ended up being like this plausible thing that I could do to help these monks rebuild this reservoir. So I thought it would take 2 months. At the time, they were looking for $15,000 to rebuild this thing. I'm like, that's like a car. That's like a lot of money, but that's like a car. That's like a cheap car back home. I think that's like a doable thing. If I can spend 2 months of my life working on this thing and $15,000. Anyway, long story short, I ended up living in Cambodia working on this project for almost 7 years as a result of this viral email. We raised over $250,000 for the reservoir, over $1 million for the community writ large. I ended up living there working to build a small-scale NGO to help rebuild this big irrigation system, and that was all empowered by this viral ability that I was given, having access to a viral network online. And I lived there for quite a long time. We found landmines. We had to demine the entire area.
I was going to ask, like, I wouldn't want to walk around a rural village in Cambodia. Yeah. Even now, I'd be like, "Are you sure this stuff is all gone?"
Yeah, it was scary. We didn't think that there were landmines in the beginning, but there ended up being pretty extensive mining throughout the area. So we worked with another organization to demine the entire area. It was a huge project. And amazing chapter of my life, but all created and allowed and empowered by this new viral ability that I was given in early social media. So I was a little bit early with social media and kind of understanding what the powers were of it, and that was obviously a really amazing use case for it, right? And how it could take this kind of emotional plea from the middle of nowhere and help change the lives of many people. So I was very, very, very interested in how it might help that. In the years after, I moved back to Northern California, where I grew up. I grew up in the Bay Area next to Silicon Valley. So I moved back to San Francisco and started working with and around a lot of the early kind of creators of the social web. So I had a lot of friends that were the first engineers at YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. And there was this amazing kind of euphoria in those early days about what these tools could do to actually change the world. And you probably remember what it was like back then. Arab Spring. Mm-hmm. I literally remember this this quote from a friend, which was, "Facebook is so good for democracy," and that was just a clear truth that people would say out loud. Right? Such a powerful tool to help us build democracies around the world, help us connect. So there was this very early euphoria around how these tools could actually make a difference, and positively. Turns out, kind of the same dynamics that give us superpowers to virally build emotional pleas for random Cambodian villagers in the middle of nowhere, can also build build support for fringe causes anywhere. And you can draw a pretty straight line from the Arab Spring to QAnon on January 6th as using social media as a tool for building viral support for fringe causes. So a very similar thing, and that's what brought me to this book and this project and this whole kind of reevaluation and accounting of how strange social media really is and how powerful it is as an influence on our society writ large.
Part of the problem with social media, as you write about in the book, is that fast-spreading info tends to be false info. It's not the viral campaign to fund a dam in Cambodia that spreads like wildfire. It's very hard for something like a book or a podcast or something that's sort of well thought out and longer to go viral. I often joke I'd be a lot richer if I could just lie and make shit up on the show and entertain every conspiracy theory or kooky ideology under the guise of just asking questions, because that stuff does tend to make for good sound bites and go further. And this is sort of Daniel Kahneman's system one thinking, right? When you get emotionally triggered, you want to push something out, and then the algorithm rewards that. But and a lot of us know this already, which is why I try to use my social media inbox only so that fans can communicate. But I get sucked in literally every day, almost every single time I open one of these apps. And at first I felt silly, like I'm lacking willpower. But I mean, it's by design, right? You can't open Instagram to look at your DMs without the first post being hyper targeted to something that you probably want to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, these tools have gotten so good at capturing our attention and keeping us there as long as possible. So good that, our agency, I think, has started to feel fuzzy, right? It started to kind of be degraded or sanded. The edges of our agency have been sanded down, right? As we use these tools writ large. And I think that's the result of three very specific features that were launched with very little fanfare at social media companies. I speak to these. I think it's really important to be precise as to like what the features are doing to us, because otherwise it's like, social media writ large is a problem, and we kind of throw our hands up. But if you look at the actual specific feature sets and how they were deployed, I think you can see you can look at the straight line that kind of that got us here from to this really weird, outrageous, cacophonous world of everything's on fire, to back to social media is good, like it's fun, we like it, it's helpful. So three features were launched between 2009 and 2012 that collectively changed our relationship with information online. And so those features are, you know them right away. The first one is the algorithmic feed. So, how content is rank ordered by an algorithm and made for engaging, for engaging us, right? Made to be sticky, made to keep us scrolling, made to keep us in there. All of our feeds these days are algorithmic. We don't see a lot of reverse chronological these days. And each one of these features came with a real important utility to them. Like, we want these features, like as users, we want these features, and as designers and developers, they wanted these features. They all made sense to deploy. An algorithmic feed is so important because it gives us access to the stuff that will otherwise be lost because we have too much information. We're just producing too much information. But it turns out a certain type of content that tends to stick to feeds that are rank ordered for engagement tends to be outrageous, controversial content, stuff that is what was referred to as borderline content. We pay attention to that stuff, right? So if an algorithm is looking at our attention throughout the day, right, you can imagine like an algorithm kind of over your shoulder trying to optimize for engagement. If you're just like not on social media at all, but like imagine an algorithm is following you around throughout the day and it's like looking at what you're looking at and trying to figure out what to serve you. You're walking down the street, everything's fine. You go to your coffee shop or whatever, you walk outside and there's a car crash in front of you. And all of a sudden your attention goes to 100% on the car crash, right? You're just like zoop on the car crash. And the algorithm is like, oh, well, you like car crashes, so from now on, I'm going to feed you car crashes, right? So you can see how simply how a simple algorithm can actually optimize for some problematic content like that, right? So the social equivalent of a car crash, right, of two friends or two acquaintances or two strangers fighting about something contentious, will capture a tremendous amount of engagement from us as well in the same way. So it makes sense that stuff began to be really sticky on the top of our feeds during that period. But it's you can see how we got here, right? You can see how algorithmic feeds make sense, right? We make too much information. You don't want to miss the important stuff that your friends have posted earlier on in the day. You don't want to miss that important conversation, that important topic. But it turns out that stuff that's really contentious, really polarizing, really anger-inducing is actually a great way to capture attention. And that was one of those problems with that first feature of algorithmic feeds.
Yeah, we've talked about this a little bit on the show with Tristan Harris, episode 533, and I just had a conversation with Anna Lemke, Dopamine Nation. It's like, I can't remember, episode 901 or something like that, about the intermittent variable rewards that you get from social media. Like, you're not sure if you're going to get likes or something interesting, so you keep pulling the slot machine. And there are counterpoints. Like, I think our mutual friend Nir Ayal talks about this. I don't know if he's mentioned it on my show. And I'll link to all these episodes in the show notes. I feel like I'm shilling a lot of these episodes. You don't have to write these things down. But it's clear that it's borderline addicting, if not classically, like, according to the term, addicting. Definitely. And you've got personal experience with this, right? Didn't you do viral news at some point? Wasn't this part of what you came up with? Yeah. So after I was working in the Valley, I moved to New York, and I was a management consultant, and I worked with a design strategy agency that was working under NDA with a very large news producer in the country. And this is in 2016. So this is like, after the viral web had really come online.
And I'll speak about this in the context of the second feature, which I think is really important, which is social metrics, right? Which is the ability to see visible numbers and likes and comments and shares, see those numbers visibly at the bottom of your feeds. Also follows is a really important metric as well. So I was working with one of the nation's largest news producers, and we were trying to figure out what the heck was wrong with their news business. They produced majority of the news for local news throughout the country. So they owned like a huge portion of America's newspapers, and the bottom had just basically fallen out of their business, right? They were not making money. They were losing money. They had huge debt obligations, and they were also just losing market share. People weren't buying papers anymore. People were going somewhere else, and the other place they were going was to social media, right? So social media had kind of had taken this entire market of kind of local news, and people's attention, instead of going to their paper to figure out what was happening, they would go to Facebook or they would go to Twitter. And so I was really trying to study the kind of engagement mechanisms here that were happening. And I happened to have another client at the time that was actually optimizing for Facebook and Twitter at that moment in time, was building viral campaigns online. And I could just see in this kind of like split screen what was happening, that old school news journalism, right? The world of kind of old school centrist journalism, where objectivity was important, where, kind of neutrality was important, was entirely losing in this battle of attention on social media to the thing that would get the emotional click, right? The thing that would get the viral hit. And everyone, all the BuzzFeeds of the world, the HuffPosts, they were all kind of just eating this market that historically had gone to local news, because local news had these kind of these slower systems in place, these slower systems of journalism, of kind of verification, of corroboration, all the stuff that we had gotten used to over many years, it was just losing completely in the battle for our attention. So the reason for this is because there was optimization that was possible for the first time, and anyone right, you can use Facebook basically as kind of a lab for viral content, or a virology lab. Essentially, you can kind of like the Wuhan Institute for Virology, right? It's open up to anyone to make viral content available if you had the right tools.
You're split testing these headlines. So basically, people like your organization are the reason that everything is, you won't believe what this one quote, or like Jordan Harbinger slams Tobias Rose-Stockwell, and then it's like, hey, there's a typo on page 359 of your book. That's the slam. Or it's a story about somebody.
Yeah, totally.
Something someone tweeted, and it's like, slams. I mean, they said like, oh, thought the movie was too long. Like,
right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But that's the thing that gets the click.
Exactly. So what you can do is you can take a pretty benign story, right? You can take a nothing burger, essentially, and you can write dozens of headlines for that nothing burger and make it something that feels emotionally urgent. And then you can test each one of those headlines using optimization tools. You split test them and find out how much engagement each one of those headlines will get, right? And you can do this algorithmically. Facebook has a whole bunch of Meta has a whole bunch of out-of-the-box tools you can do this with, and there's a whole range of kind of third-party apps that you can do this. And that the process of headline packaging it's basically like, you're trying to take this kind of benign story and make it the most kind of extreme and viral version of itself by putting a wrapper on it, right? By making it as engaging as possible. And you can test against thousands of eyeballs and figure out which of these headlines will actually get the most engagement. And when you do that, you can take basically a neutral story, like you said, about correction in a book from Jordan corrects Tobias's book, and turn that into Jordan Harbinger. He roasts Tobias or smashes Tobias, and that's the stuff that actually gets the most engagement. And so you see quickly how this algorithmic process of efficiency of trying to capture people's eyeballs turns us into kind of spectators and spectator sport, like, whoa, this is very political all of a sudden, or this is very this is very angry and emotional. And it turns out there's a tremendous preference that we have for negatively valenced headlines. So we look for emotionally negative headlines. We actually respond to those more significantly, and we saw that in the data at the time. While traditional journalism was kind of withering in real time, this kind of new salacious web journalism, social media package web journalism was turning into this kind of just this knockdown, drag out battle for attention that was just getting really ugly really fast. And so you remember these headlines, you'll be surprised to see, or you'll be shocked to see, or X makes Y cry, or whatever else, these kind of terrible headlines that we saw during that era. 2017, I think, was really one of the peaking points of this kind of the kind of curiosity gap headlines, where it's like you'll be shocked to see number 7 on this list of the most outrageous things that are going on in this particular space. And so this was this new you kind of think about like hydraulic fracking, right? We figured out how to take shale, which was just like kind of normal average benign content, and just squeeze it and turn it into something that was more flammable and more viable financially for these companies. And we all witnessed this happening in real time. I think we all remember how crazy it was when we first saw these headlines. We're like, whoa, everything is crazy now. What's going on? And there's
every headline was like, Ebola in New York. And then it's like, oh, but then the guy was fine and nobody else got it.
Totally. Exactly.
It's just deliberately terrifying, because news media paid for clicks, so they're incentivized to sensationalize stories, even if they're just end up being complete bullshit. But people have made millions of dollars doing this, and that's the problem. Is like getting the toothpaste back in the tube is really tough because the incentives are not aligned, right? The news organization is incentivized to get the clicks, and the platform like Facebook is incentivized to get the news agencies money for those clicks. So they're not going to be like, we don't allow this anymore. That's tough.
Yeah, there's an interesting quote that I have from a friend who was running a major millennial-focused online publication at that point in time, and he said this to me in confidence. It's like, our job is not to check your biases. And our job is not to kind of challenge your political opinions. Our job is to ride those opinions as far as we can take them, because that is where the ad money is. Ugh. And that is what happened, right? Like that is what happened in every kind of segment. We just got this process of segmenting our audiences down further and further into these kind of tiny little ideological chambers where you could extract attention from them in the process. So that was a process of optimization and being able to really tightly measure those likes, those shares, those comments, and really just like get as close as possible to those engagement numbers. And it was incredibly valuable for a long period of time. I need to say also that, this was a duration of time in which that was before that we started to kind of develop some cultural antibodies against it, right? So you don't see the same curiosity gap headlines anymore. You don't see the same kind of you'll be shocked to see headlines quite as much anymore. Now they're a little bit more subtle, and they're actually more partisan a lot of the time. So a lot of old guard news agencies and news organizations started to segment their audiences by ideology for the first time, and that was the unfortunate. They either went out of business in the process and like really kind of just didn't make it, or they started to segment towards their audience's ideological preferences for the first time, and more tightly than they ever had been before.
Yeah, I think you call it, or they call it, enrage to engage. It's right, the new exactly. If it bleeds, it leads. And again, I won't do this. I'm always fighting with my YouTube team, and I'm like, can you stop putting Jordan Harbinger confronts in front of everything? It's like a podcaster confronts mafia hitman, and it's like a calm conversation with me and a mafia hitman. And some of the time, I'm glad when I see the top comment is, you didn't confront him on anything. And I'm like, I know, sorry about that, we're working on this. Yeah, because I'm glad that people are even paying that much attention to it. But that negativity bias of people clicking on it because it's like, they're gonna fight in this clip, and you see that a lot on YouTube. A lot of popular YouTubers, the whole thing is AI guru predicts AI will murder everyone. And it's like a guy from Google who's not in AI at all and is like, yeah, I'm a little bit worried about AI because there's no checks on it. It's like, Jesus, man, please just stop creating this garbage. But they won't, because it gets clicks and it serves a Lexus ad and they get 1 cent per view. So they're in
totally.
business.
And there's an unfortunate piece of this, which is that most people that actually see the headline don't click through to see the article. So they just kind of assume that the headline is representative of the article itself when it actually isn't. So they'll walk away from that scroll being like, oh my gosh, like I guess Jordan is actually really he's one of those guys. He's a shock jock. He's like trying to pick these fights
Jordan's
or whatever.
Fired up against his mafia hitman.
Exactly.
Gosh, he really confronts a lot of people on YouTube videos that I never watch.
Exactly. So that's unfortunate, because that does kind of shift our perception towards a certain level of kind of collective outrage that is not representative of the actual events.
Thanks for watching on YouTube. Remember, you can also enjoy The Jordan Harbinger Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Our podcast feed is a treasure trove of insights from intellectuals, authors, spies, artists, athletes, pioneers, engineers, former mafia bosses, and business leaders, all sharing their secrets to success. For more information, click the link in the description. Now, back to the show. And emotional contagion has to play quite a part here too, which is not good, right? Because if I'm enraged that people are, Hillary Clinton is drinking child blood to stay young, or whatever the dumb thing is of the day, that the most extreme Facebook posts are going to get the most engagement, but they're also going to get shared the most, which means, aren't I going to then want other people to be as upset about that same fake non-issue as I am in that moment?
Emotional contagion is a really important concept to understand when it comes to social media, because it is something that is far more present than you'd expect online. We actually get exposed to, when we get exposed to angering content online, we ourselves will start to reflect back that content, that valence, right? That anger in other, like we'll start to feel angry ourselves. It might not be at the same thing, right? We might get angry about the anger, about the fact that they're angry in the first place. But we're hyper kind of emotionally porous social creatures, and we respond to emotion by feeling that emotion in our bodies and ourselves, right? So when we're on social media and we see someone super upset, we will likely get upset ourselves. And early on in social media world and social media land, back in even 2014, when a lot of these features came online, there was some studies that were done on Facebook that showed that emotional contagion was actually happening already. Like it was happening all the time on these platforms. And they actually they packaged that study initially. They're like, look, we can actually make happy people. We can show people who are normally like neutral. We can show them more happy content and make them happy. And so, like, look, emotional contagion is great. This is great. Everyone's happy now, right? But it turns out that there's actually kind of a strange line of manipulation there, right? So if you can actually make people happy on Facebook by serving them a bunch of happy content, you can also make people angry on Facebook by showing them a bunch of content. You can actually change their preferences and behavior on Facebook if you show them a bunch of certain emotional content as well. So it really did suggest the beginning. So even though this study was packaged as this kind of pro Facebook, look, we're making people happy on here, it was actually secretly, oh no, these are very deeply influential tools that are emotionally manipulating us. Even
it's terrible.
Though we didn't
we can make people
it.
happy. I mean, we're not going to do that, but we could. But we're going to make people angry because it turns out it's 5% more effective or 10% more effective. So that's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
And that combined with what you called, I'd never heard of this, context collapse, was so interesting. Can you take us through this? Because I'd never heard this term, but it's almost everything that's wrong with a lot of these viral memes and partisan issues that get shared and turn into 7,000 news articles.
Yeah. So when we push content through the boxes of social media, right? When we take reality and we force it through this kind of small frame of social media, we are actually changing that content much of the time, right? So we have to strip certain things out to get to get the character limit on Twitter or X, or on Facebook. When you this is like Marshall McLuhan, going back to this, as soon as you put something into a specific medium, it changes that medium, right? It changes the message of that content initially. So on social media, you'll see this all the time, in which people will take you'll see an event that happens in the world writ large. I use this analogy of this guy named Bob. Bob is kind of my analogy punching bag in the in the book. But Bob is basically a dude. He's had a rough day. He's coming home from work. He had a rough day at work. His kid kept him all night. He's just having a hard day. And he goes to the store to pick up some groceries, and he gets in the line with his groceries, and someone cuts in front of him in line, right? And he's just like at the end of his rope. He almost got fired today, and like his life is just, he's having a really bad day. And so he snaps at the person in front of him and says, "Excuse me, are you like?" And he yells at her for a second. And the person in line yells back, and it kind of escalates for a minute. Someone pulls out a camera, and they start recording that particular event, right, of this altercation between Bob and this woman who's in line. It takes a second or two, and the woman says, "Look, I'm actually really sorry. I got out of line because I had to go back to replace some broken eggs, and my eggs were, I need to get some eggs, and these eggs were broken. I'm really sorry. I just had to get back in my place in line. I'm late for a thing." And the conversation, like, he apologizes, she apologizes, things move on, right? But that particular video, right, it is now the video of the altercation between Bob and this woman. Maybe some nasty things were said in that moment, is placed on social media. It's placed without the initial context, without without Bob's bad day, and it's placed without the resolution, the natural resolution of that. It's placed on without the kind of the makeup that happened at the end of that. And it's put on social media, and all of a sudden, it's this outburst against a man and a woman, right? So natural kind of gender power disparities there that people can use as a reference point. They're like, "Oh, look, this is a problem with men in America." Someone can look at that and be like, "Oh, this is the problem with men in America. They're just constantly yelling at women and being terrible to them," right? Or if one of them is Republican, one of them is Democrat, you can add additional context to it, right? Which is
but he's wearing a MAGA hat. It's like, "Oh, look at this typical."
Yeah, exactly. Typical Republican, doing something to poor, Democrat woman here. This is, so basically it's missing the richness and nuance of real life. All of the pretext and the post-text are gone, right? So the context has been stripped away from the original event, and then people can add context to it themselves. So this tweet begins to go viral a little bit, right? This post, whatever Elon's calling it these days, goes a little bit viral, and people are like,
"It's still Twitter.
Keep up."
Yep.
Yeah. And people start commenting on it, like, "Oh, this is a problem. I can't believe this guy, Bob. He's like clearly a terrible guy." And then someone else sees that and adds their own context to it. This is an example of Trump's America. This is an example of the gender disparity. This is so it goes from context collapse, which is the removal of the original context, and it is context creep when people actually start adding their own context to it. And all of a sudden, a journalist picks up on this story. They see that it's getting some viral traction, and they write a web article about it, right? They put it online saying, this is what people are talking about online. This is why it's important, because it represents this broader cultural issue of men versus women, or of MAGA versus the blue states, or something, right? Yeah. And there's this ability to take
destroyed for cutting in line at Whole Foods.
Exactly. No, exactly right. Yeah. And so it becomes this kind of moral play for the rest of us to look at, this kind of object lesson for society, or for the particular people that view this thing, an event. It's a totally benign thing that happens. Someone has a bad day, just shit happens, right? Stuff unfortunately happens all the time, right? Like there's natural resolution. People figure stuff out. They move on with their lives. But what we've created is this vehicle for taking these tiny moments that have any kind of hint or smell of power asymmetry, and we turn them into these broader kind of theses about the world that we are living in. And everyone participates, right? Everyone that sees it can have an opinion about it and chime in, and it becomes this big cultural touch point that is actually very divorced from common reality. And that's a huge problem for us making sense of the world itself that we're living in, because we're taking these otherwise benign anecdotes and turning them into major points of moral disgust and shame.
It's scary how easily that can happen, because now that I know about that, I realize I don't look at a video and go, well, the context has been removed and maybe this additional context has been put in there by this poster on Reddit. I just don't, and I pride myself on, like, I'm a critical thing. I really don't even have that level of investigation in a lot of this stuff. Maybe a little bit, like, oh, well, how do we know that's what's happening in the video? But certainly not, like, let me imagine another context in which this wasn't nearly as bad, and let me remove the artificial context that's been placed here and try and look at it neutrally. I just never probably put that amount of brain power into examining information.
None of us do, right? We're primed to look at stuff as it is online, right? We look for the emotional hit, and that's one of the reasons why we're there in a lot of ways, right? We're looking for the emotional hit. And there's something interesting about this, which is, like, we want to know. We're such hypersocial animals, right? And we want to know what other people think about everything, right? We wouldn't say this, but we're so obsessed with opinions of others. And this is the result of a very natural human trait as social creatures: gossip. We love gossip, right? We wouldn't say necessarily that you love gossip, but as a hyper integrated society, we like to know what the status is of everyone around us and what people are doing. So when we watch something like that, we'll be like, oh, okay, this is interesting. This is a piece of juicy gossip that I should be paying attention to. If enough people are paying attention to something, we feel obligated to also pay attention to it, and that is a piece of the problem here. So if everyone is talking about this power asymmetry between Bob and this woman, you should have an opinion on it too, because if your friends ask you about it later, then you should also have an opinion about it. You should be able to talk about it, right? Even if it's been blown far out of proportion from the original event.
That leads to the concept of moral emotions. You mentioned this in the book, how we change our morals, or at least how we act on our morals in groups with other people, and how this happens online at scale. Tell me a little bit about that, because I hadn't thought about that, but it is terrifying. It definitely happens. You can almost feel it happening in real time if you're paying attention.
Yeah, moral emotions come. So this is a frame from Jonathan Haidt, who's my collaborator at NYU. He wrote the foreword of the book, and he's a good friend. He's been researching moral emotions for a very long time. And moral emotions are kind of fundamentally different from other emotions in our bodies, right? So you have an emotion. I'm sad. I need to change my state. I'm angry. I'm angry at something that's happening in the world around me. But moral emotions tend to involve other people, right? They tend to actually involve righteousness and indignation, shame, disgust. All these are moral emotions, and they involve other people and how people should act in society. And we're all operating with different moral emotions. John thinks about it as a kind of a set of taste buds that we're born with, and they kind of develop over time. There's some integration between the emotions that we're born with and how they actually end up changing over time. Moral emotions do change over time, but we have basically these different taste buds. I might, the same way that you might like some spicy food and I might like sweet food, or have a preference to this. He breaks them into 6 different categories: authority, in-group, care, fairness, sanctity, and liberty. I think I got them. And each of us kind of has different balances of these. And liberals and conservatives tend to have a very different but discernible profile of moral emotions. And they basically are kind of like filters that change how we see events that happen in the world. And these moral emotions are very, very powerful. They're much more powerful than you'd expect. The way that you might see an interaction between two people as being deeply disgusting and problematic, someone else might see it and be like, seemed fine to me, right? So we're all kind of coming at these different from different perspectives, right? But online, when we see particular moral transgressions, these moral emotions come into play dramatically, right? So we actually end up in these kind of cacophonous pile-ons with other people that share the same moral opinions as us, right? So there's this moral segmentation that's happening online when we're actually served a lot of the content, and this is actually what optimization does, is that actually it will start to filter for morally outrageous content that you find morally outrageous, right? So these algorithms will actually begin to serve you content that will speak to your moral emotions specifically, engage your moral emotions specifically. And that actually starts to kind of peel us into different moral tribes in a way online. And this is one of the reasons why we see so many identity groups online that are so significant. There's a lot of in-group and out-group behavior in which we feel very tribal online. Is why you see a lot of hashtag identity online, is because you end up with these moral threats. And when we feel a moral threat, we feel this impulse to find our tribe, to find our in-group, and we want to find safety in that in-group. So when there's a threat to the way that the world operates, a threat to us, or a threat to a group that we hold in high esteem, then we feel called to defend them. And there's two things that happen there. We denigrate the out-group, and we venerate the in-group, right? So we actually look to the out-group and we say, those people are terrible because they are threatening my in-group with my moral foundations. And they are terrible, and my in-group is great. Like, this is why I feel so good about Democrats and why I hate Republicans. Republicans are despicable, Democrats are great, or vice versa, right? And that's what happens when we're exposed to moral threats. And that's what social media is very good at doing, and traditional media in concert with social media is very good at doing. It's serving us moral threats to our way of life, to the way we think about the world, because it is engaging and because it will sell ad revenue.
Yeah, it's terrifying how the incentives skew towards outrage because it's profitable. And it works in podcasting too. The biggest podcasts are either political and extreme. They're not like, oh, we sort of discuss current events in a bipartisan way. Those are not the biggest podcasts. The biggest podcasts are extreme in one direction or the other. And then there's true crime, which is like a whole separate phenomenon that's basically murder porn and triggers fear and thus interest as well. So it's not totally dissimilar, right? If it's not true crime, learn the story of a bank robber who didn't hurt anyone. It's serial killers that are really gross and terrifying and are still at large. Those are the most popular shows. And Jonathan Haidt, by the way, episode 90 of this show, really, really sharp guy. I got to have him back at some point. The longer people spend on social media, the more likely they are to be politically extreme. That is, well, you wrote that. That's terrifying because that just shows you that's, I mean, look, correlation's not causation, but that shows you that it's essentially, there's a good chance that's the drug that's causing this effect.
Yeah, this is some research by Billy Brady and Molly Crockett, who were at Yale, and they've done some incredible research on the power of moral outrage online to change our behavior. And what they found was that basically, if we are exposed to a significant number of outraged pieces of content online, it will actually change our behavior over time. So I can explain this in more specificity. I'll take us back for a second to B.F. Skinner, who is the psychologist who did a bunch of groundbreaking experiments back in the 30s with pigeons in boxes. He would put pigeons into boxes and they'd flash a light, and if the pigeons pressed a lever, then they would get a food pellet. In that process, he was basically training the pigeons to be conditioned in a certain way. But if the pigeons were exposed to some randomness and the light was flashing and they sometimes got a food pellet, they sometimes didn't get a food pellet, they would actually get obsessed, right? So coming back to the intermittent variable rewards thing right here, they would get obsessed with it, and they would start pressing this button on a regular basis to try to get the same response from the food pellet. So slot machines, this happens with slot machines on a regular basis. We know that if you can just put people in a room and have them press a button, just the same button over and over again, it hacks a part of our brain and changes our behavior over time. So this is colloquial. It was an operant conditioning chamber. It was colloquially called a Skinner box, which is that if you put people in a Skinner box, and you see this in video games all the time, loot crates, right? You don't know what you're going to get, so you keep on playing until you get what you want, right? And people get in these loops on a regular basis. Social media operates in very much the same way, and it actually trains us in the same way as well. So if you are posting online, we're all signal processing machines. If you're posting online, and you post something, it gets 5 likes. You post another thing, it gets 10 likes. Suddenly, you post something that gets 100 likes, right? And recognizing that outrageous content, all right, outrageous content online will get a 17% boost to virality for every moral and emotional word that you use. So if I post something that is, I am disgusted about this thing that I saw. So like, if I'm stuck in traffic, if I tweet, I'm stuck in traffic, it'll get average likes, right? But if I tweet, I'm disgusted by the Democratic administration for not dealing with this traffic problem. It is horrible.
Biden's America, everybody.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Biden's America. That will get a 70% boost to virality for every moral and emotional word that's used there. And as a result, that will actually they'll get more traction online. They'll get more likes. They'll get more shares. And I will get more signal as an individual, right? Because of that outrage. So average content, 5 likes, 10 likes, whatever. And then all of a sudden 100 likes. You're like, wow, that's important. And so Billy and Molly's work showed that people that make outrage expressions will actually begin to make more outrage expressions over time because of this tremendous signal that they get online. So they'll actually start pushing more outrageous content out there on a regular basis because it tends to give us the signal back to us. And we're all signal processing machines. We all want the world to see us and to like what we are giving it, but it's actually training us to be more extreme and outrageous in our sharing, in our personalities, and what we share with the world.
But it's not just random people who are pissed off who are doing this, right? We're all sort of journalists now / no one's a journalist now. And I've noticed that when I read you ever go online, you try to find something and it's kind of old and it's an article from the LA Times 2002 or even the 90s and it's formatted all weird, but it's still digitized. You read it and it's almost a completely different animal than a similar article you would read today. Many people now think opinion is journalism. It's not. There used to be this clear line. And if you ask people, hey, who's your favorite writer, journalist, author, whatever, they always list these talking heads from whatever news channel as their favorite journalist. And I'm like, that's not, technically that person might be a journalist, but really they're just somebody who yells at somebody else and that other person yells back at them. And they're both journalists, right. But they're not writing. They're not though, right? They're talking head. They're entertainers that are pretending to be experts on a topic so that they can yell at each other on a TV news show. And that's kind of what the news is now. And it's not accurate, or it's not true to form.
Right. Yeah. So there's this difference between journalism, straight news, and opinion. People don't recognize that there's actually historically a difference between those things, but for the world of straight news journalists, those are actually different entire rooms, right? So you'd have the editorial wing of the paper, and then you'd have the straight news wing of the paper, essentially, where people are reporting on facts, they're corroborating stuff, they're making sure that things are accurate, and they're just getting the news of the day out there, right? And opinion, which is mostly what you see it on Fox News, you see it on CNN, you see it on MSNBC a lot of time. That is very fundamentally different from straight news reporting. Straight news reporting is really like just the facts reporting. It is what happened, why did it happen, where did it happen, what is going on in the world at this very moment. Versus opinion, which is analysis. It is this kind of editorial accounting of what's going on. It's why is this important, and we all respond to that more significantly. We're all very good at opinion. We're not so good at the actual process of journalism, of proper reporting, which I think is one of the biggest problems that we're facing right now, is that we don't really know a difference. And we have all, as you said, we've all become journalists on social media. And as a result, we don't actually, without knowing the kind of precursors and preconditions of being journalists, we need to know how journalists actually source information factually. And as a result, everything is becoming opinion. Everything is becoming editorials. Everything's becoming analysis. Everything's becoming a talking head on a regular basis now. We're not parsing information the same way.
Well, it also makes us easier to trick because a lot of people are checking out. You give this parable of the island. Is it possible to go through that in a brief way? Because I thought this was very eye-opening in terms of how bad actors take advantage of this information environment.
So imagine an island. It is a very large island, but it has five farms on the island. It is a democracy. There's 5 people that get together every year, and they vote on the policies of the island and kind of the trade rates with other islands. And this island is a basic democracy. So they elect an executive every year. And I use this as a kind of example of the most basic, kind of the smallest possible democracy and what would happen on an island. Is this little parable here. So they have a single person that goes around and factually reports on what's happening on the island. The island's big enough so that people actually don't see each other very much. There's 5 big farms, and there's just not a lot of coordination possible amongst people without having a journalist, a guy that goes around and just keeps track of what's going on the island. So one year, one of the members of the island, he is digging a well, and he finds oil on the island. All right, so there's the oil bubbling up out of the ground, but he knows he's going to have to share that with the rest of the collective of the island. And this guy, we call him the loud man. He is a kind of a blowhard. He's always a little bit, a little bit obnoxious, always saying what he wants, but he's part of the democratic system. So he finds oil on the island, and he tries to think of a way of getting this oil for himself, but he can't, because if he reports it to the reporting man, then all of a sudden he's going to have to share this oil wealth with the rest of the people that are living on the island. So a few years pass, and suddenly, one year, there's this trader that comes to the island, and he has an antenna. He has this new thing called a radio, and he puts this radio on the island. He hooks everyone up. Everyone thinks this is a great idea. We have this new radio that people can use to communicate in real time. The reporting man loves the radio. Everyone loves the radio. They can basically just share information in real time about what's happening all over the island. So the loud man, seeing this opening, he starts to use the radio against the reporting man. He starts yelling about problems that he's seeing on the island. The reporting man's running around just kind of corroborating or debunking the claims of the loud man. But one year, there's a storm that hits the island, and the road goes out around the island. There's this really long road that goes around the island, and this reporting man is trying to keep track of all the repairs that need to happen on the island. He's reporting it to the executive and the rest of the people on the island, and he gets something wrong. So he misreports on a piece of the road that's actually broken, and the loud man calls him out. He says, "Look, the reporting man is clearly lying, because there's a problem with the island, the problem with the road, and he got it wrong," right? So he's able to kind of start to make a stink about what is going on elsewhere on the island, and tries to basically reduce the confidence of the reporting man. So I'm trying to encapsulate a multi-page story here, but basically,
you're doing a good job. Yeah.
All right, thanks.
We're here for it.
All right, great. The loud man, now that he has access to the radio, he can start to make his own messaging, and he can start to add confusion to the mix. He can start to say, "Oh, look, I think the reporting man is actually lying. I think that he's in cahoots with the executive, and I think that we shouldn't trust him, and I think that you should vote for me instead of the next election." So he starts to increase the level of chaos and confusion by using this radio antenna to kind of promote his own narrative about what's going on. The reporting man keeps on trying to keep up, but there's this one kind of black mark on him now, because he got something wrong, right? So, and you see this happen all the time with traditional media. A lot of people will say, "Oh, the media is biased, it's wrong," and you see these small points of infraction in the general media, where a media organization, like an old guard news organization, will actually get something wrong. They'll get something wrong, and then a certain political aspirant will look at that, and they'll say, "Oh, look, the media is broken. The media is actually lying to you." And usually that actually the people that do that have an agenda. And so in the case of the loud man, he's able at the next election to increase the confusion just enough to make a number of people not vote They don't vote for the executive, and they stop paying for the reporting man. They stop paying for the newspapers. They stop paying for the media that's actually reporting what's happening on the island. And all of a sudden, the loud man, he can capture enough votes to become the executive himself. And at that point in time, he passes a new law banning the reporting man, and basically allowing for him to use the radio however he wants, and for him to sell the oil rights in secret, and for him to make money and exploit the island. So I use this as an example. So I'm sure you've heard this Steve Bannon quote: "The real enemy is the media, and to deal with them, we need to flood the zone with shit." Okay, so
yeah, I have heard that. That's crazy, though. I didn't know if that was real.
It's a real quote from him, and it's a real strategy that authoritarians have been using now for a while. Russia has turned this into a science in recent years of basically trying to increase the net quantity of misinformation and garbage in the system so that people stop caring. They get cynical. They stop trusting straight news reporting. They stop trusting media in general, and they instead check out from politics, or they go with their gut and kind of vote for the guy that has the loudest voice. Mm-hmm. And so that is, I use this parable of an island as like the smallest possible democracy. And what happens if you remove this kind of central player who is the reporting man, the person that goes around and actually tries to make sure that information is good. If you remove that and you put this new system in place in which anyone can kind of say anything, right, and allows for enough confusion to exist, that reduces the coordination of the goodwill actors, right? And so it allows for the single or the small minority of badwill actors to actually take the place of good straight news reporting. And when that happens, you actually end up with an authoritarian slide. You end up with people that are willing to kind of take what they can from a democratic system, because the noise and the garbage in the system, the garbage information is so high that people can't actually figure out what is really happening. So Putin has become very, very good at this. Putin is incredibly good at just spewing misinformation and falsehoods out there so that his population, they can't figure out what is real and what is not. They're like, I guess you can't know. It's, truth is unknowable, reality is unknowable. We might as well go with Putin. He seems to know what he's saying.
Right, and because when there's uncertainty, you feel a little. Most people feel a little bit threatened or scared because they don't know what's out there. And when we feel like we don't know what's out there, or maybe we feel like our current government isn't doing enough to keep us safe from those unknown outside threats, people seek authoritarian leadership. So there's a lot of power to be gained by people who want to shape media and propaganda and other messaging to trigger this in people so that they vote a certain way. And I think this was in your book, and I've seen this elsewhere. An uncomfortably large percentage of people say that they would prefer and or be okay with autocratic authoritarian rule as long as it was like their guy who was in charge. And I wish I knew the percentage. Do you know what I'm talking about? Have you heard this?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's close to a quarter of the country that we're in on both sides of the political spectrum right now.
Yeah.
That's they're actually okay with an authoritarian. Yeah, absolutely. And that is a direct result of losing faith in the media, essentially, and losing faith in a central body that might keep potential autocrats to account, right? We might keep the government accountable, keep all of us accountable. When we feel threatened, by external narratives, when things get extremely confusing, then we tend to default to this authoritarian disposition. And I understand it. Like, I understand where it comes from, right? If there's enough things that feel like they're going wrong in society, then it makes sense. You'd want to just go with the guy that seems like is going to fix it, right? Go with the guy with the simple narrative who's telling you the story, telling you what you want to hear. And that authoritarian disposition is present in a huge portion of the population now. Enough so that America, I think, is a lot closer to the default of like throwing up their hands when it comes to democracy and being like, just put the guy in charge that seems like he's going to do what my party needs done. And it's a sizable fraction of the country.
Yeah, that's really scary. And I want to highlight the fact that people usually do bad things because of bad incentives. And you're pretty clear about this in the book. It's not that they suddenly turn evil or that the other side is evil. It's that the incentives are bad. And you give a really good example of standing up in a theater. If somebody decides to stand up in the theater to get a better view for themselves, people behind them are going to go, well, I can't see the show now. So then they have to stand up, and the people behind them have to stand up. And this is in a set of, what would you call it? Like cascading incentives, where everybody suddenly has to break the rules in order to just even function in that environment. And that's really a bad way to exist. And you can see examples of this all over society. And it's only going to get worse if we allow it to go unchecked, which seems like what is happening.
Yeah. So this is a broad category of things called coordination traps, which are really important to understand. They come from there's like a mathematical foundation for why they happen, but basically, you can see coordination traps happen all over the place, right? So you can find them in nature. So there's a thing called a crab bucket, which if you're crabbing and you put a bunch of crabs into a bucket, they can't coordinate together. So every time one of the crabs tries to reach the edge of the bucket, they could climb out if they were able to work together. But every time one starts to get to the edge, another one will pull them down, right? So it's like this collective coordination problem they have. And as social creatures, that's actually our greatest superpower is coordination together, right? Is this ability to collaborate, to solve problems, and work towards greater solutions that we couldn't do as individuals, right? So you can see how coordination traps or coordination problems are actually kind of the antithesis of social success, right? The antithesis of our species success, right? Because if you can make things, if you can make enough incentives visible for doing the wrong thing, people will do the wrong thing, even though they know it's the wrong thing. So another example is a bank run, right? If you have bad information, if someone has bad information about the stability of a bank, and this just happened very recently, you had this kind of viral explosion of misinformation about the solvency of a couple of different banks, and they were all shared via WhatsApp in group text threads about this bank is maybe going under, and all of a sudden people start pulling their money out. And if you're halfway through, you have perfectly good information that the bank is solvent and has no problems whatsoever. Even if you know that, if you're in the middle of a bank run, it still makes sense for you to go out and pull your money out of that bank, right? So this is a coordination problem collectively. Like a small fraction of people have bad information, and they start this process, this cascade, and you caught in the middle. You know it's the wrong thing to do, but you're going to do it because otherwise you're going to lose all your money. And there's a whole category of these issues, these things that happen. Yeah. So the example of you're at a chill concert, and someone, it's like a sit down concert, like say on a field, and someone's playing some nice acoustic music or something, and someone in front stands up, and the person behind them stands up, and the person behind them needs to stand up, and the person behind them needs to, and all of a sudden everyone needs to stand up, and everyone has a worse view of the stage, but you had no choice. You had to stand up to do and the person behind you had to stand up, and so you can see this kind of coordination traps happen all the time, and that is really kind of the origin of a lot of the worst things that happen in society writ large, is that you end up with these things where the incentives for doing the wrong thing are greater than the incentives for doing the right thing, even if you know consciously that it's the wrong thing to do. And so social media is very much like a collective coordination trap for us, right? There's a lot of things about social media that make it easy for us to do the wrong thing, right? So if you want to get ahead in the attentional environment, right? If you want to make sure your newspaper stays alive or your publication stays alive, then you got to use this crazy headline packaging in order to make your message heard. And you have to compete in the attentional environment against the loud, obnoxious rage baiting that happens, right? Or if you want to get a lot of friends and followers online, you need to compete in the same environment, which kind of forces us down it's the race to the bottom of the brainstem, as Tristan Harris says, right? You have to force yourself to do things that aren't necessarily in the best interest of everyone. And social media is very, very good at that. And unfortunately, democracies writ large are prone to a lot of the same problems that come from coordination issues. So it's important to recognize that coordination traps have solutions to them. usually what it requires some kind of authority or consortium of individual players to get together and act as an authority to try to reset the game, to try to reset things. So it's that if in the case of the person on the concert, it's the person on stage saying, "Excuse me, could everyone please just sit down so everyone can see the stage?" And then all of a sudden there's a rule in place, right? There's a suggested norm, and everyone sits down and it resets the game, right? In the case of a bank run, it's FDIC, the government coming in and saying, "Look, we are going to stand behind the deposits of this bank, and we are going to make sure that depositors aren't going to lose their money." So it's a trust game writ large. And if you don't have these third parties that are willing to kind of come in and help reset the game, then coordination traps will ruin it. And so democracy is very much like a coordination game, and you need to have a lot of players that have good information and that have accurate information in order to make sure that you're getting the right candidates. And social media has very much undermined our ability to get good, accurate information on a regular basis, and it's given us tremendous incentives to defect and to kind of break the general coordination function of good democracies.
I've got some practicals for how people can consume media better and become better at thinking about these sorts of problems. But there's one that I'd love for you to teach us how to do before we wrap here, which I thought this was genius. How do we reframe our concerns? Let's say we're arguing with somebody. How do we reframe our concerns with those we are arguing with in terms of their values? This is a great sort of rhetorical technique that I'm embarrassed I didn't know it before, or didn't do this my whole life.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm going to pull from a couple of pieces from the book here. So when it comes to disagreeing with others, disagreement is required for good functioning societies. Like, we need to disagree about stuff. That's how we get to better truths. That's how we get to better understanding, right? It's like, if you think about democracy itself sort of functions like this big outrage machine, right? We're given these tools of functioning government, but we need to be able to see clearly the problems in front of us, and we need to be able to debate clearly about what those problems are. And that's the point of the First Amendment, right? It's like, when I say something that is contentious, you can call out the ways that I am wrong, because you can see through your perspective the ways in which my arguments have flaws, right? So democracies really do require disagreement, public disagreement, debate, compromise, all of these things in order to function correctly, right? But when we're disagreeing online, oftentimes there's not good incentives for actual debate and discussion. When we disagree online, we actually have followers that have been built up as like bleachers alongside of our every disagreement, right? And you can think about this: if you and I are having a conversation in private about a contentious issue, we're more likely to try to get to the core of the issue, right? You and I were like, okay, cool. Like, let's talk about the central point of disagreement here. Let's talk about the issue at hand. But if there's suddenly dozens and dozens of people around us, right, that are on my side and on your side, I'm going to want to look as good as possible to the audience, and so I'm going to try to find the point of playing to my audience's desires as opposed to kind of refuting your central point. And that's a big problem with social media at large, is that it actually pulls us away from this process of kind of collective debate and understanding, and pushes us towards this more rhetorical fighting that happens focused on what the desires of our audience are. So if you are actually disagreeing with people, and you do, and this will happen, right? It's part of being human and part of sharing a world together. We need to have better disagreements, right? And so the point is not to not have disagreements. The point is to try to figure out how to disagree better, not less, just disagree better. And there's a really helpful frame for this, which you can kind of think about sort of like as a secret code. And I think about this a lot when I disagree. I have a lot of friends that are politically diverse, come from very different backgrounds and have different beliefs. And what I find is that if you start from the kind of the point of the general narrative, of the kind of rhetorical battleground narrative, then you're actually explaining the problem, but you're not speaking to the person's emotional foundations. And that's really important, that if you want to actually change people's minds, you need to get curious about what their value system is. You need to understand what their moral foundations are. So if you can figure out what their moral foundations are, what kind of core values are that they're trying to explain. Jonathan Haidt uses the analogy of an elephant and a rider, which is basically our conscious brains are essentially the rider, right? This kind of lawyer on top of an elephant that is explaining away the actions of the elephant, which is our kind of emotional, values driven self that is trundling along, kind of going with the emotional whims of the day. But the elephant, the rider on top is basically the lawyer. He's just explaining this elephant, right? The emotional. So most of the time when I'm explaining an argument, I'm actually the lawyer on top explaining to your lawyer, lawyer on top of your elephant, what is wrong with your argument. And that's not going to change the perspective of the elephant, right? So the point is, if you can actually figure out what is driving the elephant, if you can figure out what kind of moral foundation they are following, then you can actually you can change the direction of the other person's elephant. You say, okay, cool. So we're disagreeing about, say we're disagreeing about gun rights, for instance, right? And I'm coming at this from the moral foundation of harm, of safety, right? I want you to understand that gun rights are really important to the safety of my kids going to school. I don't want there to be guns in my school, for instance, right? And you're coming at gun rights, thinking about it in terms of liberty, the liberty to own a firearm, right? You want to have, I'm not saying you're a gun owner, but if you want to own a firearm, that's coming from a liberal foundation, or sorry, a liberty-based foundation. So if we're fighting about this, I'm going to be talking to your lawyer. Instead, I should be talking to your kind of foundation of liberty here. And I should think, okay, how can I reframe my argument in the frame of liberty? What is how can I make the safety of my kids an issue of liberty, right? So I want to live in a free enough society where my kids are free to not worry about having guns in their school, for instance, right? And so I can start to change my messaging and get curious about their moral foundations. And the questions that you can do here is really, you can ask, what are the values that are important to you in around this issue? What are the core emotional feelings that you get when you think about this, about what should and should not be happening when it comes to gun rights in this country? And if you get curious about that, you can act less like a warrior and more kind of like a detective or a scout, and being like, okay, cool. Let me understand where you're actually coming from here. And then you can try to reframe it based on this moral foundation, and you'll get much, much further in the topic of contention. And you'll get much, it's almost like kind of ninja skills for understanding conversational debate and disagreement. And you'll get closer to a foundation of changing people's minds and of moving the conversation forward. Because first of all, you will understand it better. You'll understand what the core issues are for the other people that are kind of holding their ground, and they will understand you better too. And you'll both start to kind of act in concert better and figure out what the foundations are of this. So definitely don't assume the beliefs of others. I think that's one of the biggest problems that we face right now in political discussion, is that we assume the worst of the other side, right? We get this small kind of fraction of an opinion that we assume is that representative of the entire opinion of the other side. But instead, if we focus on the emotional foundations of the individual, you can get much, much further in solving in finding common ground.
Man, I got more practicals in the show close, but I have to say, Tobias Rose-Stockwell, you definitely brought 3 names worth of value and expertise today. And I appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you, Jordan. This was awesome.
By the way, do people tell you look like Jason Vanderbeek from Dawson's Creek, or is that just me making it? You never get that?
Never gotten that before.
I'm looking at a photo right now, and I'm like, he has the same sort of beard thing, and the hair is similar. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's just, it could be the angle of the camera. Yeah, take it where you can get it, man. I don't know how old you are. I'm 43. Right. When people are like, you look like, I'm like, tell me more. Right. But hey, I appreciate this. The book is really an interesting, we left so much out. People are like, oh, I already got this really long show. There's so much. I take notes, right? I've got half of it highlighted because it's done, and the rest of it's just like, we're never going to have time to hit it. I mean, you go over the history of how we all sort of became journalists, starting from the printing press. We talk about authoritarian beliefs coming down from the church, the fairness doctrine. I mean, there's a whole lot in here that we didn't even get to. So I don't want to discourage people from checking out this book just because they feel like we covered a lot today. There's just a lot going on. And I think it's an important subject matter that a lot of us, it is easier to just go, oh, I don't know. It's so complicated. Who knows what's correct? I hear people say things like that, and it makes me want to stop and shake them and be like, no, apathy is the enemy. That's the enemy, not
truth
the other
is noble.
side.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Well, this is awesome. I feel honored to have the opportunity to unpack this with you, and just to leave people with this. Like all of these problems that we're facing right now are quite solvable. Truth is knowable, and I think we can get to a much better future if we're willing to put in the effort.
Thank you for checking out this entire episode on YouTube. If you want to follow up on this topic, check out our podcast feed or visit us on our website at jordanharbinger.com, where you can learn more about our guest and dive even deeper into what we discussed today. And remember, YouTube is not the only place that you can check out The Jordan Harbinger Show. Any podcast app should have us. Check out the links in the description where you will find access to our shows that don't appear on YouTube, like Skeptical Sunday, where we debunk topics like crystal healing, GMOs, conspiracy theories, homeopathy, tipping, even lawns, to find out if they're backed by science and logic, or if they're just complete nonsense. Spoiler, many of them are complete nonsense. Also, our Feedback Friday shows where we help people escape from cults, get raises at work, and take all manner of questions from you, the audience, all the way down to the bottom of the barrel. And every episode of The Jordan Harbinger Show has something useful you can take away and apply in your own life and help you navigate what I know can often seem like the overwhelming and paralyzing challenges of modern life. Life can be hard, yes, but we are here to help. And if you appreciate how we help, remember to like, comment, and subscribe.